Hi everyone, Gary here. A little while ago, I completed a month-long experiment that challenged my understanding of the human mind in profound and unexpected ways. Today, I will share my experience with you and tell you all about gazing, how it works, what it does, and why you should try it too. Gazing is a meditative practice that involves sustained visual focus on an external object. This practice involves selecting a method and a specific object, and then gazing at it for a set period of time. It can be done as a daily practice or a one-time experience. Anything that fits this definition can be considered a gazing practice, with some common sense caveats and limitations. For example, do not gaze directly at the sun and don't gaze at specific individuals without their consent. Be mindful of safety and boundaries. Here are a few examples of common gazing methods. Fire gazing, which can be performed with any living flame such as a candle or a bonfire, or even a digital recording of a fireplace if real fire cannot be safely arranged or isn't accessible at the moment. Water gazing, typically performed with a natural body of water. If you gaze at the ocean, a sea, or a lake where the opposite shore is outside your field of vision, you also have the additional option of horizon gazing. While gazing at a living running water, such as a stream or a narrow river, has a grounding and purifying effect. Crowd gazing. This can be done in a park or another public place with reasonably high foot traffic, where you can watch people discreetly. Just make sure to passively observe the movement of the crowd and don't stare at specific individuals. Be mindful of other people's boundaries. Shadow gazing. You can learn a lot from gazing at shadows, and just as with other categories, there are multiple ways to perform this method. One popular approach is an exercise in non-doing, a concept described by Carlos Castaneda, which helps you see the habitual reality from a different perspective, thus expanding your perception and leading to increased creative and psychic sensitivity and altered states of consciousness. You can perform it by looking at the shadows of objects in your environment instead of the objects themselves, as you would usually do. Another way to perform shadow gazing is to create two overlapping shadows and gaze at their intersection. Object gazing. This method uses a stationary object. It can even be a simple blank wall, in which case you select a feature on the wall, like an off-color spot or a paint bubble, and focus your gaze on that spot. The more you do that, the more you realize how much is actually going on in a seemingly empty white surface. More commonly, you can choose a more conventionally interesting object, like a vase or a crystal. Anything that is interesting and personally significant in some way can further help you sustain and deepen your focus. Due to the relatively constant nature of physical objects, this is the preferred way for daily practice. An object generally doesn't depend on factors like the weather or time of day, and is always readily available. Now, there are some popular techniques that fit the technical definition of gazing, but are known for their own merit as standalone practices, such as mirror gazing, often used in psychomantium or shadow work. It can lead to vivid visuals and strong emotional expressions. Exercise caution if you choose to try this method. Nature gazing. This is something we do without thinking about it in terms of spiritual practice. Nature gazing happens spontaneously when you're in presence of natural wonders, such as beautiful clouds, a starry sky, or autumn leaves. Darkness gazing. Completely depriving your eyes and visual cortex of stimuli can produce unusual effects such as vivid memories, hallucinations, and deep emotional processing. Darkness gazing is a key component of darkness retreats. Eye gazing with a partner. A popular relationship building exercise can be done with a romantic partner, a friend, or even a coworker. There are many types of gazing, but I think I gave you a general idea, and now I have to move on and finally tell you more about my experience. The practice of gazing has been on my radar ever since I read a novel called Dream Searchers, a fictional story loosely based on the teachings of Carlos Castaneda, as well as other practices popular in esoteric circles. In the story, the protagonist was instructed to gaze at an object for 2 hours a day as part of his spiritual training. The novel, in turn, got me interested in reading the works of Carlos Castaneda himself. Throughout his book, multiple types of gazing practices were introduced, but despite the variety, they all seemed to serve more or less the same purpose. Train your mind to focus deeply on one subject and pay full attention for a long period of time, filtering out distractions to a degree that would be impossible without special training. And when you achieve this depth of focus and your mind goes quiet, that's when really interesting things can start to happen. But more on that later. Having a skeptical mind, I did not have high expectations. Of course, some improvements in focus were inevitable, but what else could I expect? Although being skeptical is necessary in this type of research, it's not quite enough. You also have to be creative and imaginative. And so I did secretly hope to experience altered states of consciousness and spiritual revelations, perhaps similar to what Carlos Castaneda was describing in his books. I wasn't quite sure, but I didn't have the same training and guidance as him, and my practice was simplified for the sake of streamlining the experiment. What I did find was unexpected, but made a lot of sense in retrospect. I was able to tune into my body and emotions on a deeper level than probably from any other method I've used in the past. I was able to differentiate between subtle somatic sensations and feel emotions rise up, tracing their path through my body. For example, I could trace the same anxiety starting as a heaviness in my chest and shifting into tension in my shoulders. I could feel how the emotions modulate my thoughts. And if you pay attention carefully, you will find it too. Your thoughts carry the same flavor or palette as the emotions you're experiencing in the moment. At least until you start paying conscious attention to them. And then you can start taking control. And it might sound obvious when I say it out loud, but feeling it viscerally and clearly in your body is different from knowing it intellectually or reading about it in a book. This kind of awareness is incredibly helpful in emotional regulation and shadow work. A clear, predictable, and extremely valuable effect is increased focus. When you train your attention daily to remain on one spot in the physical space, this same level of focus can be applied to anything: a task you're performing, a book you're reading, or a lecture you're listening to. For that benefit alone, I strongly recommend at least trying this practice. And of course, speaking of altered states, I was not able to enter vivid memories like in the experiences I've described in the initial report video, which you should check out below if you haven't seen it yet. However, I was able to achieve hypnagogic states on many occasions throughout the experiment. Hypnagogia is a very productive state if you're focused and sensitive enough to perceive it and are able to stay alert and lucid for long enough to utilize it. It's a state of consciousness between wakefulness and sleep. The most obvious sign of hypnagogia during gazing, at least in my experience, are dreamlets or microdreams. These are very brief dreamlike states. They can occur very rapidly and tend to sneak up on you. As soon as you close your eyes to blink, you might find yourself waking up only a few seconds later, realizing you were immediately plunged into a short dream scenario. I also experienced residual hypnagogic imagery even after realizing that I was starting to dream and opening my eyes. They would hover in front of my vision as 2D images and disappear gradually bit by bit. But that only happened about 3 or 4 times throughout the whole 30-day experience. I should also mention the time when, instead of seeing a static image, I saw the flame of the candle grow and jump at my face from the candle. I believe this effect was occurring due to my consciousness transitioning from theta state in which microdreams occur, and into alpha state, which is closer to normal consciousness but more relaxed and focused. Opening your eyes during hypnagogia is likely to produce that transition. So unless there's a real fire hazard, don't freak out if something like that happens, and don't worry about it too much, because it's not going to do any permanent damage, unless of course you have pre-existing conditions which you think might be a risk factor in trying this technique, in which case I would consult a medical professional before you try. But if you're not someone who's predisposed to hallucinations, then don't worry too much about hypnagogic hallucinations, because they only last a few seconds. They might spook you like the flame hallucination did for me, but as long as you use proper fire safety, or even better if you use a neutral, non-hazardous object, then you're gonna be totally fine. If you practice hypnagogic states enough and learn to recognize them and remain lucid, you can utilize this state for lucid dreaming, shadow work, and other practical spirituality modalities. Finally, another interesting phenomenon I observed was the flame entity, or candle guide. On at least 2 occasions, the flame of the candle turned into a luminescent hooded figure. On the first occasion, it was facing away from me at a 3/4 perspective. I believe the angle is not accidental and symbolized the fact that it was aware of me, but was not actively interacting with me. Instead, it was passively demonstrating its actions. It was performing a certain dance or ritual with rhythmic, repeating movements. I could speculate about the nature of the entity. Was it purely my imagination, with no deep meaning behind it, or a manifestation of my unconscious mind, communicating with my consciousness through vivid symbolism, or maybe a separate self-conscious spiritual guide using hypnagogic states as a portal between realities to manifest itself in my awareness. Either way, it was an interesting experience, and if something like that happens to you, it is worth writing down every detail you can remember, including how you felt and what the vibe and intention of the entity appeared to be. Trust your intuition, and don't be afraid to be creative with your interpretations. When it appeared a second time, the experience was even more interesting. My eyes were half closed, and the way the light was filtered through my eyelashes, or maybe due to the way it hit my retina, or both, it appeared as wings of bright golden light growing from the candle entity's sides. I was surprised at how detailed they were, including the proper anatomy of long, powerful bird wings with fine details like the texture of the feathers. There was also 2 pillars of light emanating from the entity along the vertical axis. The bottom pillar was bright and had a fibrous texture. It ended in a branching structure like the roots of a tree. The top upward pillar was more ephemeral and brilliant, and instead of clearly defined boundary, it ended in a smooth diffusion at the top. I marveled at the vision and thought it was a shame I couldn't take a picture of it. It was facing me fully this time, and projecting soft, loving strength through its golden glow. I'm purposefully avoiding describing it as an angel in order to keep interpretations open and flexible, but I imagine that's what an angelic encounter may look like. The structure of the pillars reminded me of the upward and downward energy channels appearing in many spiritual traditions. And I could gladly keep talking about this correlation, but I want to stay on track and focused and tell you about day 30 and why a 2-hour gazing session is a completely different practice comparing to a 30-minute sitting. I do recommend hearing me out before you try that. I'd been dreading day 30 since day 1, especially early in the experiment while I was still getting comfortable with prolonged gazing, when boredom and distractions were the biggest obstacles to progress. And yet, I was worried about the wrong thing. But let me start from the beginning. First of all, getting comfortable before the session is essential for any length of time, but with a 2-hour session, it becomes a matter of failing or succeeding. Halfway through the exercise, what I thought was a comfortable sitting position, cross-legged on an elevated pillow with my back propped up against the wall, became agonizing. I was forced to break my concentration, to stretch out my legs and change my position. So watch out for that, and don't worry if you have to experiment with multiple sitting arrangements, because it's going to be worth it. When you meditate regularly, you become familiar with a state of impatience that can roll in like a wave, making you wonder if you forgot to turn on the timer, or maybe there's something else that you should be doing with your time instead of just sitting there. And if you acknowledge this feeling and let it be without reacting to it, it eventually passes. And if you meditate regularly, it eventually stops happening or becomes very easy to brush off when it does. But not with a 2-hour-long session, where you never know if 50 minutes have passed or just 15. The uncertainty and impatience came and went in multiple waves. Nevertheless, it was a good exercise in patience and internal stillness. The worst and most unexpected effect happened after the session. And I don't mean to scare you with it. I'm just describing my experience. And in fact, now that I know what to expect, I know that if I had handled it differently, the outcome would have been much more beneficial for me. And I'm actually glad I had that experience, so I could tell you about it. About what to expect and how to prepare. Ordinarily, your mind keeps itself busy with habitual thoughts and immediate concerns. But when you force it into a singular focus for a lengthy amount of time, other things may surface that are ordinarily hidden below the habitual thinking. During the experience, I didn't feel much emotionally, just felt somewhat suspended in a strange liminal state. But when I got up at the end of the 2 hours and began pacing to exercise my legs, a wave of heavy emotions washed over me. I was not expecting that, and I was completely unprepared for it. Thinking about it in retrospect, I know I should have blocked off the rest of the day for integration, restoration, and self-care. I should have been really strategic about it, making sure I could take as much time as I needed to process the experience. But I did not know that at the time. I still had half the day full of tasks ahead of me, so after a quick groggy nap that felt like an absolute minimum thing I could do to restore my balance, I had to force through the rest of the day. The emotional heaviness extended into the next day, and only when it finally began to settle by the end of the day was I able to begin critically evaluating my experience. As I mentioned before, if done right, this type of exercise can be extremely beneficial, but you have to be aware of it and approach it with care. So remember, if you're going to gaze for 2 hours, take it seriously. Make sure that you're not doing anything important or time-sensitive afterwards for the rest of the day. Make sure you have an aftercare strategy ready. Have your journal nearby. Plan with a loved one or even a support group and let them know that you might need some company that day, and be prepared for vulnerable conversations. Plan a walk in the nature or a comfortable evening with your favorite book and a cup of hot chocolate, or whatever else calms you down and allows you to rest and reset. Those are just examples, but the bottom line is, do not approach this haphazardly. Be strategic and responsible, and don't underestimate the force with which the floodgates of your subconsciousness might open. As is always the case with spiritual experiments, the results were not exactly what I expected. The vivid memory experience that I was hoping for never happened. However, the improved focus and somatic sensitivity, while expected, were much more noticeable than I anticipated, which was a pleasant surprise. The microdreams, especially the ones that lingered after I opened my eyes, were something I was not aware of ahead of the experiment, but became a big part of it, forcing me to research hypnagogia and gain a deeper understanding of the practice itself and the phenomena attached to it. The candle guide was the closest to the spiritual experience I hoped for, especially the winged version. But no full-on stepping through a portal to another dimension and receiving ancient wisdom. That being said, I think it was a very valuable experience overall, and once again, I highly recommend trying it as a daily practice. I even recommend trying a 2-hour session, but of course with all the precautions in mind. I'm actually thinking of including it in a monthly or bi-weekly routine for myself in my own practice. When it comes to experiments, there is always room for improvement, especially after the first try. And knowing what I know now, here are a few things that I would do differently or pay more attention to. The biggest one, of course, is to better prepare for the long 2-hour session and make sure to have an integration and grounding strategy, as explained earlier. I also had to switch my setup a few times, experimenting with different candles and noise cancellation solutions. A tall, thin candle might burn too fast, so that instead of having the flame at eye level or slightly below all the time, you will quickly find yourself looking down at it and straining your neck. So make sure to choose a thick candle that takes longer to burn. If you're practicing daily, make sure you have ways to adjust the height of the candle as it gets shorter, or replace candles frequently. If you live in a noisy environment, I would recommend using headphones and listening to something soothing and monotonous. At first, I tried a couple of different white noise tracks. One had distracting sounds in it, which were very subtle but became obvious and jarring after listening to it for a while in a hypnagogic state, in which the depth and clarity of your perception increases in proportion to the quality of your attention. The other track I tried had ads in the middle, which completely defeats the purpose of the exercise. Then I tried rain recordings, which was a big mistake for me, since I used to listen to rain sounds to help me fall asleep on the subway in the past. Even though it was years ago and with a different track, the effects were similar. But this is my subjective experience. So if you find rain sounds soothing, then by all means go ahead and try them. After that, I tried a couple of different singing bowls videos. They were good at first, but also too structured. So after a while, my mind figured out the patterns and used them to track time, which inevitably lowers the effectiveness of the exercise. I finally settled on a rhythmic and repetitive, but deep and rich shamanic drumming track. Shamanic drumming seems to work the best for me, but I recommend experimenting with different sounds and melodies until you find something that is relaxing but doesn't put you right to sleep and also doesn't distract you with sudden noises. Ideally, you want to find a track that has the same duration as your intended practice. That way, you might not need to set up a separate timer, especially if it has an exit signal at the end, in case you fall asleep or find yourself in a deep trance and need a cue to bring you out. During one of my early sessions, I actually did fall asleep at the end, and it took me multiple minutes to realize that something is wrong and it's too quiet in the room. And then I realized that the exercise was long over and I was just sleeping. So remember, comfortable sitting, a candle at comfortable distance and height, a noise cancelling strategy which doesn't put you to sleep, doesn't jolt you in the middle, and doesn't distract you, fire safety, an integration strategy such as journaling, and a grounding and recovery strategy for long sessions. I described my experience in order to inspire you to try this practice, as well as to help you prepare for what to expect. But even if you precisely follow my instructions, your experience is likely to be at least somewhat different. Still, there are two benefits that seem to be universal that make the practice worth trying: improved attention and emotional regulation. I know it might sound a little abstract when you're just hearing me talk about it, but take my word for it. Do this for at least a couple of weeks, even just for 15 minutes a day, and you will feel exactly what I'm talking about and see firsthand how impactful the benefit can be. But what about you? What is the biggest benefit you would like to achieve through gazing? And what is your biggest fear or obstacle? Do you think spirit guides are real conscious beings, subconscious projections, or overactive imagination? Or maybe something else entirely? Let me know down in the comments or in the Discord group linked below. This concludes the candle gazing experiment. My next experiment seeks to answer a big question in parapsychology, a question most easily answered through objective personal experience. Is clairvoyance possible? Stay tuned for more updates coming very soon. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Help me continue bringing you this type of content. Thank you for watching, and good luck.